incompetence looks an awful lot like conspiracy, so I always try and fall on the side of incompetence. But whether it's incompetence or conspiracy, it's working exactly to what our adversaries want. We are deindustrializing the Western world, and we have this fantasy that we can keep designing machines when we have no idea how they're made, that we can keep developing new alloys when we don't hands-on day-to-day make them. That's why when I see these protests and people doing the die-ins and the screaming and the marching around with the radioactive sign going and, the Helen Caldicots of the world.
Well, they'll be dying of cancer, but they're not dying from lack of electricity. They might be sweating a bit in the summer. Ooh, but you mustn't be too hot in the summer. That's what we've got sweat glands for.
Now, that was tolerable to me 15 years ago. Okay, equal time, you get to say your piece, but no more. You are the person killing people. You are going to be the ones keeping the coal plants running. The nuclear guys are the ones that can take 100 coal plants offline with a single plant.
So John, can you talk about your work at NREL?
Back in 2006, 2007, the skyrocketing gas prices was bringing a lot of interest in things like cellulosic ethanol, BP and Exxon and stuff. We're doing, who knows, anywhere from real research to probably some greenwashing PR. We were trying to extend a contract for a researcher doing work on dye-activated solar cells. What we learned, what most people in the public don't understand, is that all solar cells inordinately benefited from good PR. Amorphous, flexible, I don't care what kind of solar cells you're using. Solar, and especially utility scale solar, you've got to dope these silicon sheets. You got to have glass sheets, impact resistant sheets, aluminum frames, vapor deposition of the materials using vast amounts of energy. They're almost all refined using vast amounts of electricity. As you start to pay off that energy deficit, oops, I need more batteries. Oh, what do those take to produce? You get into things about the efficiencies. Not only does it decay over time, but you might just blow out your solar cell altogether when just something as basic as a maple leaf falls on the panel. You get a blank area in the solar cell. It almost acts like a capacitor, and the energy will build up behind that shadowed area of the leaf, and you'll get a burnt out section of your solar cell. So when you look at utility scale installations, even when they're in the desert, you'll see that these companies will spray Roundup and all sorts of knockdown to kill and make sure nothing ever grows underneath these solar cells, all in the sake of making sure that grass doesn't grow high enough, or God forbid a bush should grow high enough and fall on the face of your solar cell. Then they put in these large solar cell arrays using lots of concrete, lots of aluminum, tons of wiring, going to inverters to get on the grid with sketchy, shaky, badly formed power.
I can switch in reactances and capacitances. I can put in power electronics inverters. You can decouple your wind turbines and your solar plants with power electronics inverters, but these are very expensive systems. I recently got to speak with Department Energy Assistant Secretary Pat Hoffman. I had a candid conversation and got some interesting data out of her. There is not a single transmission expansion project in this country that's not currently being challenged by landowners. Distribution feeders are being overloaded due to home generation of solar energy. We're not storing it, it's just getting burned up. And if there's too much, then we simply shut parts of the grid off. And they're penalized when they do that. You have reliable service providers being forced to accept unreliable inputs. They call renewable energy negative loads. Okay, and finally, many long lines in the Western Interconnect are currently being series compensated, so the torsional amplification issues are only going to increase. $10 trillion in transmission grid upgrades might allow us to start integrating some of these renewable power plants, and that's without a single megawatt being put on the grid.
And you're sending workers into these solar fields to clean off the dust that constantly builds up. And when you get just a little bit of dust, you're efficient. You can lose 10-15% of your efficiency. So you're constantly cleaning these things.
John, I'm sorry. I like the fact you've got this tone, but we have a little bit of this tone from last time in the library. So I'm hoping for a...
That's because I'm pissed about
I know
this,
you're
man.
pissed. I
Look,
I am at the fucking end of this shit, all right? The day of that clown bullshit is over.
Every new technology has spawned exponentially more new problems.
I call for your immediate resignation from the NRC as our failed government agency.
Did you listen to Alex Canera's talk?
Blue curve and the red curve indicate survivability of the species that do the sequestration to seafloor limestone. If those curves cross, it's all over. Before those curves cross, extinctions begin. And extinction is forever. It's not like global warming or sea rise, which might go back down. Once these animals in the oceans are extinct, they're extinct.
We are a generation, we're 20 years away from murdering for good this planet. I am done trying to play nice. I am done trying to placate the fucking unscientific retards.
Everything else you do is unimportant, except to close down all the reactors and to make the governments put solar panels on every single building and just cover the place with windmills. It's what we've got to do if we want to keep using electricity. Otherwise, we have to stop using electricity. And think about it. Mozart wrote by candlelight, and so did Shakespeare. So the human race has lived for a very long time without electricity.
I am done playing nice with these fuckers. I gotta live on this earth.
Mozart and Shakespeare wrote by candlelight. Ooh, candlelight? I'm writing an article for the International Herald Tribune now about the future of nuclear power, and I ended it by saying that and said, and the editor wrote back and said, well, you don't want to encourage people to think they have to go to candlelight again. Well, what's wrong with candlelight?
That's right.
Get the fuck out of our way so we can fix this earth.
We're all naked to nukes. The scream of the Fukushima's mothers.
You just feel there's something wrong with nuclear. Well, you don't know, but you feel it. You heard about it. You heard about it from Helen Caldicott, a certifiable lunatic.
In fact, a nuclear power plant will produce the same amount of CO2 in toto as a gas-fired plant, so you may as well just use gas.
I found out, first of all, that it is a zero-carbon power source, at least to the exact same extent that we regard renewable energy sources as a zero-carbon power source. This has been repeatedly assessed and demonstrated. The idea that nuclear power is high carbon across the life cycle is a false meme.
Nuclear power produces massive quantities of global warming gas. Parts of Tokyo are extremely radioactive. There are wild boar in Germany that almost glow in the dark. But 40% of the food probably in Europe is radioactive. More people have died from Chernobyl than in the Black Plague. Then we extrapolate through to Japan. Japan is, by orders of magnitude, many times worse than Chernobyl. The doctors have been told by the superiors not to tell patients that their symptoms are related to radiation. This is the biggest medical conspiracy and cover-up in the history of medicine, George. And I wouldn't talk like this unless I knew there were answers. Close down all those reactors now, and stop burning fossil fuel now, and fill the country up with solar and wind and geothermal and conservation. I mean, Germany's going to be 80% renewables very soon. Germany.
Go find an island where you can try and live off the grid. I'm going to help de-acidify the ocean. I'm going to provide baseload power for the billions of people who don't have it. And I'm going to get the goddamn carbon out of the air while you're sitting there wiping your glass of your solar cell down with your fucking deionized water, all right? So I don't give a shit about this tone, Gordon. The tone should be fury. You know, it's a beautiful day. But it's not going to be a beautiful day in 20 years when every animal in the sea that has a shell or any sort of carbonaceous covering is going to be dissolved before your eyes. Starfish are already dissolving. Fuck global warming. Are you a lunatic and you don't believe in global warming? Great, go right ahead and don't believe in global warming. But there's no way you can deny that the oceans aren't getting more acidic. And when the bottom of the pyramid of life gets pulled out, the whole pyramid comes crashing down. It doesn't levitate in space. Next year, you're going to be like, you're even yet more pissed. You actually blew a vein out in your eye. And it's like, because I'm done. I'm so exhausted with this Sisyphean project. And now even Energiewende, the Germans are like, we screwed up. We put too much renewable onto the grid, and we are destroying our grid. We're destroying our industry. Companies are packing up. I mean, I guess it's a godsend that Germany got there before the United States, so they can be the bellwether to show how insanely useless of a pursuit this BS idea of trying to absorb the free energy from the only nuclear reactor that matters, the sun. If I hear another person say that, I'm cocking them in the fucking face.
When they get to be any meaningful percentage, that's where the problem of their intermittency becomes overwhelming. And you can actually spend way more to try and solve that problem than you spend on the overpriced stuff to begin with. I think people deeply underestimate what a huge problem that is. The economics are so far from being appropriate.
Im letzten Jahr so viel, und jetzt kommt's, Braunkohle verfeuert wie seit 1990 nicht mehr. Das hat doch alles keine Logik, was die GroKo da macht. Sagen gerade sämtliche Experten, Leute, ihr fahrt die Scheiße vor die Wand und sie ziehen es trotzdem weiter durch. Vor ein paar Tagen erst gab es für die GroKo in Sachen Energiepolitik wirklich, das ist nicht übertrieben, eine 6- mit Brief an die Eltern.
Angela Merkel versuchte es mit Fassung zu tragen. Versagen beim Erneuerbaren Energiegesetz, so das Urteil der Expertenkommission, die sie selbst eingesetzt hatte.
Aufgeschrieben, die Ökostromförderung lässt den Strompreis immer weiter steigen und führt zu weniger Klimaschutz. Jeder Deutsche hat im letzten Jahr 240 € für Ökostromumlage gezahlt. Babys, Alte, jeder Deutsche. Insgesamt 21,8 Milliarden für Strom, der an der Börse aber nur 2 Milliarden wert war. Das ist doch krank. Albrecht, warum machen die das? Das ist doch total unlogisch.
Oliver, es gibt Dinge zwischen Himmel und Erde, da kommen Sie mit Logik einfach nicht weiter. An die müssen Sie einfach glauben.
It's not a joke anymore. Marginal clowning antics, they don't make a difference hardly, but they do make some difference. And at this point in the crisis, any difference in the direction of insanity and so-called renewables is a big difference to me. Why don't you go get the guys from NREL and tell them you're going to give them a lifetime supply of money so they don't have to worry about the fact that they're going to lose their job when they tell the truth. All right? Because they'll never tell you in public, but if you work there, if you're their buddy, if you're eating a sandwich next to them, at NREL, out in the lawn, out in the parking lot where the non-working Prius and the old, rusting Honda Insight is sitting next to the non-working windmill in their little, what amounts to a sculpture garden of non-functioning renewable horse shit. When you're sitting there eating your sandwich next to them and you're like, this is never going to work, is it? They're like, it'll never work. Well, why do you do this? Well, I like living in Colorado. It's really close to skiing. I get paid well by the government. I got a pension. Well, you don't believe in this stuff? It's like, it's a job. You talk to these cellulosic ethanol guys, the bioalgae guys with the biodiesel crap. Here, we got diesel from a little green plant. Wow, that's really cool. Can you make 1 billion gallons of it? Fuck no. Well, sure, if you want to pay $1,000 a gallon, it's like, that stuff is never meant to work. It's greenwashing. It's a jobs program. I mean, they're cool. It's kind of neat. You put a plate in the sunlight and you get electricity out of it. Wow, that's really neat. It works good on satellites that don't have an atmosphere to deal with. Everyone loves to look at the stuff from Mars rover. Well, that's nuclear, all right? Deep space probes. You need nuclear for that.
Well, can you take let's move you into the middle a bit, okay? Can you
I'm gonna go, do you understand me?
Can you articulate the utility of solar or wind?
Well, I use solar on my farm, okay? I am too far away from the closest transformer and I don't want to pay the money it takes to pull a line to my farm, right? So I put in solar because I'm not there very often. And I got my little inverter and stuff in there, and I go there for maybe 2 days at a crack every 10 days or so during the height of summer when it's the sunniest it's going to be. I don't have air conditioner, none of that stuff. And I still run out of power. So I could never live like that every day. Wind and solar might work in at the edge of the very periphery of the grid, or on an island, or on a buoy in the sea, or what have you. Fine, that's great. But that is not baseload energy. You are not going to run an aluminum foundry on solar electricity, all right? You're not going to build flywheels, pump water up into a mountain. You're not going to do any of this shit to replace any of the baseload that matters. The baseload we have today is coal, unfortunately. And luckily in this town, Chicago, 70% of our baseload is nuclear. The state of Illinois as a state gets over 50% of its power from nuclear. So Chicago is the France of America. Chicago gets 70+% of its power from nuclear. That keeps things going. That keeps what industry we have going. It keeps prices stable. There is a not insignificant amount of people in Europe and the United States, Australia, New Zealand, they will tell you they want to deindustrialize these places.
Every time you walk into one of those doors and it goes in front of you, that's powered by electricity. And all this frozen food is just obscene too. We shouldn't be freezing food. When I was a kid, there was no frozen food. We did all right. To smelt aluminum or to make aluminum, it requires huge amounts of energy. We've got to stop using aluminium cans. That's just crazy.
If we don't have enough baseload power, well then the idea of building another icky steel refinery just goes out the window. And this idea of distributed networks.
The first time we saw subsynchronous resonance occur on the grid was when they started building power plants at coal mines and connecting them via long transmission lines to loads. So back in 70 and 71 at Mojave, they connected this power plant up to the grid, and stuff starts shaking, and boom, the shaft of the turbine snaps. And they're like, what in the world? Did the hand of God come down and do this? What's going on here? And so they actually had to go back and do the studies and say, hey, some kind of frequency of vibration is going on here. And they looked at not just the turbine and its dynamics, they looked also at the dynamics of the local grid and the capacitively coupled line, and they're like, oh, hey, by adding a series capacitor, I'm also introducing a resonance. And if that resonance plus the resonances, any of the resonances of the rotating machinery add up to 60 hertz, they'll interact. And so basically back in the 70s, we figured out how to plan and mitigate series resonance from fossil fuel generators and series compensated lines. And it was basically a solved problem. After about the 80s, we kind of made sure when we upgraded it wasn't an issue. And now it's becoming an issue again. We're revisiting the old issues that we had solved because we're all of a sudden trying to integrate inferior energy sources. In fact, wind turbines have more resonance than a typical steam or gas turbine because the blades themselves wobble in the wind. And I mean, they fatigue and break, and it's serious. A wind turbine blade will be flung miles, and a lot of times that'll be due because there was an electrical resonance with this turbine.
That's a sham. That's like everyone for himself. That's the most defeatist crap idea in the world. These idea of every house will have its own bank of solar cells, and then a battery bank, and then each neighborhood will be able to be its own little micro mini grid and smart grid. Bullshit. That's a way of saying, hey, you people who can't afford this stuff, fuck you, you're on your own. It'll be like the internet of power, where one thing goes out, it'll just route around it. It's yeah, you got the $10 trillion. That's what it'll cost. $10 trillion to change the grid, to stabilize your crappy solar power, to stabilize your harmonically destroying wind power. You got the $10 trillion for that? Because after $10 trillion, you know how much extra power you've put on the grid? None.
And that's where I came from it, looking at, hearing Solartopia from Harvey Wasserman and reading that, and then looking, gaming out the engineering behind that. It's a bunch of crap.
can you imagine, if we like made the roads into like solar cells and like there'd be inductive coils and your electric car would just be automatically charged for free by the thousands of acres of solar highways. It's like, yeah, what are you doing when it snows? Does the snowplow fuck that up? Oh, look at this shiny thing over here. There's a shiny thing. There's a bloom box. Oh, a bloom box, and there's a grid level solar. And people are like, oh, look at, maybe we could do that. And it's like, no. Could you look over here? We need to rebuild our grid. We need to rebuild our bridges. We need to have, steel mills in this country for middle class jobs. Before it was kind of like an entertaining, like thought, experiment. Like, what if we could do this? What if we could do this? The trouble is now the thought experimenters are creating policy.
Yeah.
If you make bad policy, you pay for it for a generation. And if there's one thing that I've learned in Washington is policy is real, is where the rubber hits the road. Social policy, are you pissed that kids have a direct, school to jail pipeline? Well, that was because of a policy people put in place. Is now the chickens are coming home to roost.
Yeah.
Right? So now the utopists back in the 70s and 80s, they grew up, got their law degrees, and became policy makers, and they're setting policy that is going to decimate the United States and Canada and the Western world.